Bible had talked about how the moon would turn to blood and the sun would turn to sackcloth before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The only one that it happens on the 4 biblical holidays is 2014, 2015. It doesn't happen again. In this century, you were going to find 4 blood red moons on the biblical holiday. God wants to signal us, send a signal to us if we're watching the signal. And the Hebrew word implies, if you look it up in your Strong's Concordance, not only is it a signal, but it's a signal for coming or his appearing. And the word season, he also said they're not only for signs, but for seasons. Well, when we think seasons in our normal mindset, we're thinking winter, spring, summer, fall. Yes. But the Hebrew word is the moed, which refers directly to the festival of the Messiah. It literally means a divine appointment. When we hear the word feast, we think food. But the Hebrew word has nothing to do with food. It has to do with a divine appointment, as if God has a day timer. And he says, okay, I'm going to mark the day and the time when I'm going to signal my appearing. You look at the Gregorian calendar, you see April 15th, October 8th, April 4th, September 28th. You don't see a pattern. But on the biblical calendar, the Passover is there. Any of you can go there. That when you have 4 total blood red moons back to back, is called a tetrad. And some centuries, for 400 years, there were no tetrads. This didn't happen at all. And so I looked to see in this century how I think is very significant. So then I looked at last century. And believe it or not, the last time that 4 blood red moons occurred together was in 1967 and 1968, tied to Jerusalem recaptured by Israel. You didn't have any astronomical tetrads in the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s. In the 1500s, there were 6, but none of those fell on Passover. There's a good chance there will be a war this summer. To me, it's the whole insanity of dividing Jerusalem and dividing the land as well. If they try to divide Jerusalem and create a Palestinian state, to me, that is really going to be the trigger. NASA's website and looked at the solar eclipses. And sure enough, there's a solar eclipse on the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. Wow. And then I went back, and there's a total solar eclipse on Adar 29 and Nisan 1, right in there at that date. And the reason why that's so significant is because Nisan 1 is the beginning of the religious calendar, Passover 2 weeks later. Yes. And Nisan 1 is when Moses set up the tabernacle. That's when the glory of God fell. And so Adar 29 is an ending of the religious calendar, kind of like a new season. And so on Adar 29, leading into Nisan, and we need to be watching and know the church is commanded to watch. 2008 is a very critical year. Yes. And beginning this year, there's a total solar eclipse, only one. Next year, there's only one. And the next year, there's only one. But they all fall like a bullseye right on the 1st of Av, or the 29th of Tammuz. Yes. And for the Christians, many aren't aware of the significance of that date because we haven't been watching the biblical calendar. But the 17th of Tammuz is when they worshiped the golden calf. Yes. It's also when Nebuchadnezzar broke through the walls of Jerusalem. Wow. And by the way, it's also the same day the Lebanon War started 2 years ago. The missiles went through the northern border of Israel the same day Nebuchadnezzar broke through the walls. Yes. Well, Mark, historically, it was on the 9th of Av that the 10 spies brought the bad report and didn't want the land. They despised it. Because of that, that day has been cursed in Jewish history. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, it was on the 9th of Av. Yes. And 600 years later, when Rome destroyed the temple, it was on the same day, the 9th of Av. Yes. All the Jews were kicked out of England in 1290 on the 9th of Av. All the Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492 on the 9th of Av. World War I started on the 9th of Av. Hitler's proclamation to kill the Jews was on the 9th of Av. And they evacuated the Gaza Strip at sunset on the 9th of Av, the same day they rejected the land 3,500 years ago. And so it's known as the Dire Straits. And on the 1st of Tammuz is right, 1st of Av is right in the middle of those dire straits. We have these solar eclipses 3 years in a row.
Wow. Tell us the
first off, Zechariah 8:19 is a very key verse because it mentions these 4 fast days. And in Jewish writings, blood red moon bads bode for Israel. But a total solar eclipse means bad news for the nations.
The Gentile
The Gentile nations. And in Zechariah 8:19, in the context of these fast days, God says he's going to turn these fasting days into days of great joy. In other words, the nations are going to be judged during that time. And so here, right in the middle, for the next 3 years, we see judgment coming upon the nations by having this total solar eclipse right in the midst.
Oh, wow.
That we're supposed to be reading the signs of the times. We're not supposed to be dead. We're not supposed to be asleep. But we're supposed to be watching because he's not to come to us as a thief in the night.